Hi, guys, and welcome back to this week's episode of Let's Chat Ethics. I'm your co host, Ariana.
And I'm your other co-host, Amanda. So this week, a lot has happened. I think everybody probably is familiar with what has happened in the Capitol, etc. But we're gonna keep it to the tech side. So I guess it was the week before last that Trump was banned from Twitter, essentially, and as well as that, this social media platform Parler, which is popular with Trump supporters, was also basically banned by all technology companies. So their app was removed from the Google Play Store and the Apple Store, and they were also denied services from AWS at this point. So the website went completely blank. And this week, to talk about this, we've got a very special guest, so somebody who's responding to this idea that the fact that they have been removed from the website. The CEO of Parler has said that they're going to bring back the platform with more content moderation. And first they suggested using volunteers. Now they're saying they're going to use some algorithms. So we've got Zeerak Waseem today to discuss this with us, who is an expert in hate speech detection online. So I don't know if you want to introduce yourself a little bit more, talk a little bit about your work, and maybe your thoughts on everything that's happened.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, a lot has happened. So, okay, I'll start with the self-introduction. So, like Amanda just said, I'm Zeerak Waseem. I'm a PhD student at the University of Sheffield, and I'm going into a postdoc at the Digital Democracies Institute at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver. And my work has dealt a lot with the question of hate speech detection in social media. And on the other side, on broadly on bias and fairness in machine learning, but more looking at it as a cultural problem rather than a technical problem. So on to the things that have happened. So Parler just got back online, I saw today. But yeah, I mean, a lot has happened. I think that it was very cute when the Parler CEO said that they're going to use algorithms.
I know, I was
But,
like,
okay.
I saw loads of people tweeting, like, sure, that's a good idea. Let us know how you get on.
Exactly. Like it's just like, oh, this is cute. This is definitely going to work. And I don't know. Parler also had this moment of where they realized that they needed content moderation, and interestingly, it kind of lost a little bit of a following um, in the first few months when they started like grappling with the fact that abuse happens and people are targeted and there's a lot of harassment. But now, given that basically everyone who's been ousted from Twitter and Facebook have been like, find us in Parler, there's an uptick again. I mean, in general, it's like the entire bannings and so on have come is a little bit too little and too late. Um, I remember like this predates the Trump presidency by a few years, but I remember Twitter posted like, they posted a tweet like, what are the things that you would like from Twitter? And the replies were mainly like, remove Nazis. And we're talking like 2013, 14, I think. And then they gave us longer tweets, which was, exactly what people
Exactly what we need.
Um, exactly. So, I mean, there have been a lot of the developments from the tech companies seem to have been a lot in, as a matter of PR and as a matter of legal risk management. Which is kind of disappointing that there's not been like a moral stance. During the Trump presidency, Twitter has probably been the company that's taken the strongest moral stance on things. And Facebook has kind of like accepted the conservative claim that they are over moderated and that they are being silenced, and and so on, in spite of all evidence pointing to the opposite. I mean, the Trump presidency has been interesting for a lot of reasons regarding online hate speech. It's like there's definitely been some allowances of more abuse and hate through Trump's rhetoric. Like it's shifted the rhetoric further towards not a tipping point, but like towards. I only know this phrase in Danish, but like towards a conflict, or like it's made it a bit more. It's made it more extreme.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe part of it is that every time somebody's talked about deplatforming people, it always comes down to this idea that it has to do with free speech, and I think in terms of, I think free speech defends the right. I mean, it's to do with the government regulating speech rather than platform, right? So having free speech doesn't necessarily give you an automatic right to a platform.
No, definitely. And like, I don't know, I'm really tired of this being made into a free speech question. Because whenever I mention what I do to some stranger at 3 a.m. in a bar, their first response like, "Isn't that a free speech issue?" And I feel like collectively, and it does not matter who we are, collectively, we can be better than drunk people at 2 a.m. Like this is just like the bare minimum while we're sober.
I can just imagine that. I can imagine. That's the thing. I feel like people love to defend hate speech with it's freedom of speech, but really it's just hate speech and racism and sexism and whatever negative like comments people are making on the internet. But what were your thoughts on thinking that kind of the argument that the tech companies shouldn't have this much power to remove people from a platform, and that it's essentially giving people who haven't been like voted in through democracy kind of more power than government?
Okay, so I find that very hard to disagree with. But I don't think that these platforms should exist as private entities to begin with, particularly if they want to take on a role as a public platform for conversation. But given that they are private companies, and there's legal allowance for them to be, and there is no viable non-public or like non-private alternative, I think that they are within their rights to settle what kind of speech they want to allow and disallow. And I don't think that that's necessarily an issue because there are always alternatives. Right? If you are completely deplatformed, no one will take your money, no one will host your accounts. You can set up a computer in your own apartment on your internet service and run a website there. Like the right to speech is never removed. It's just the removal of a platform. And like there are a lot of good things about these different platforms, but I also wonder what the benefits of them are as speech platforms or as platforms for dialogue. So like I generally use Twitter as I use it as a hot mess of things, but like it's primarily to communicate with my academic community, right? And like and follow activists and people who are talking about things that I'm not aware of that I should be aware of. And I think for those purposes, Twitter is great, but I question whether it's really a suitable platform for any kind of person with power to remove or like power to influence things on a larger scale. Like someone tweeted out when Trump was removed from Twitter that Twitter deemed the person with the nuclear codes too dangerous to have an account to talk. Which is just like, it shows kind of the issue here, right? Because obviously people in power should have a platform to speak, but if they're too dangerous to trust with public speak, do we really trust them with power?
Yeah. I think that's it's a very interesting point. I mean, the fact Trump got into power in the first place is very questionable. Someone who actually didn't have any political experience whatsoever, kind of. And I guess it could be argued that he even got to where he was maybe through the influence of social media. That's how he managed to gain his popularity in the first place, because not many people thought he would ever even win, but he has this like large following of people through the social media sphere. So yeah, I think that's a good point what you just said about should someone who's not allowed on these platforms really be in a really big position of power anyway.
And I mean, it's also about like what are again, I feel like it comes back to the question of what the purposes of these platforms really are. Is it as a platform for geopolitical conversation, which I strongly feel like it should not be, or is it a platform for people to shitpost about, I don't know, neural networks or whatever, or like philosophers or whatever? Like, it's for the latter. I'm happy enough for these platforms to exist because that's fun and entertaining content, but also it's not really. It doesn't matter that much, right? Like there are definitely individual ramifications for people, but at least we're not gonna find out if like a country is being invaded via Twitter. It's just such an absurd notion.
Yeah, but to some extent, I wonder if there's just no way around it, right? So if all social media platforms have been designed to get you to spend as much time with them as possible, and it's much more engaging than reading through a newspaper, which has, long articles and sometimes a little bit harder to read stuff. I don't know, like, there's no way that we're not going to end up with the majority of people getting their news through these platforms, and because they're meant to be more engaging, then it even focuses more specifically where you're getting your news from and based on who you're following and all of that, right? So it doesn't really matter in a way how or like what the original purpose of the social media platforms were, right? I think if you think about Facebook, I don't know, maybe it was to connect with your friends, and now it's to get fake news and
I mean, Tinder is such a nice example of this, right? Because it's a platform that was created to hook up with people, and we've seen during election campaigns and things that there have been voting drives on Tinder. So like you match with someone and you tell them like, "Have you remembered to register to vote? You should do that."
The new way of dating.
Exactly. Like, are you an engaged citizen? Which is, I think that's that's pretty okay, right? Like, it's perhaps not the ideal that we're looking for. That we use hookup apps to get people to engage in democracy. But I mean, it's still confined to a like fairly small sample, right? So it's still the primary purpose of the app is still for hooking up with people, dating or whatever. Like, but let's be honest, it's primarily hooking up.
Tinder definitely.
But like Twitter was set up as this microblogging platform where you could speak to issues that were interesting for you, and then and also to be able to connect with celebrities primarily. And then we saw a lot of innovation from primarily Black women on like creating the idea of threads and like having hashtags to segment things. So that worked out. Like, so that kind of became a conversational platform, even though it was initially thought of as like a unidirectional platform. I mean, Facebook was also created to hook up under the guise of we're friends. But like I think the broader point I'm trying to get to is like if you can have specific purpose platforms that will kind of retain their specific purpose, but these general purpose platforms seem to have more of a risk of drift to becoming large players into into dangerous waters of really nuanced and complex problems.
Yeah, I think with I think the whole fake news thing now is like what Amanda was saying about everything being more kind of digestible on social media. Even seeing like not just like Trump, but now everyone on social media is a qualified doctor talking about the vaccine, talking about coronavirus. And I think it's kind of, I've even found myself going into a momentary hole where I'm like suddenly looking at this doctor like, wow, God, oh my God, he's got so much knowledge about the vaccine that oh my God, I shouldn't take the vaccine. And then I'm like, wait a second, like, is this guy even a real doctor? He's just put DR on his Twitter. Does that actually mean he's a doctor? Like all these things. But I feel like people feed into this because it's easy, it's digestible, rather than taking that extra time. And actually, I spoke to this girl from like high school the other day, like reached out to me, wanted to talk to me. She's 15 years old, and one of her questions to me was like, which I was like, that's a big question, was how do we make sure that people of my age and the future generations know that we're not reading fake news, and how do we stop fake news, and how can we make sure that my generation's not feeding into this? And I was like, wow, I mean, that's a hard one to even grapple with now, because I think people don't want to take the extra steps either. I said about taking extra steps, but people don't want to take those extra steps if you're busy in your busy life to find out who someone is, what they're talking about, to like credit check it. So I think, like you were saying, I think Twitter and even Instagram now and Facebook, they have gone into these murky waters now of being spaces of kind of, I don't know, everyone living in their own reality, really, of what's real and what's not real.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't really feel like I have much to say there, because I agree that they are like, that's a
I
big
know,
question.
I know, but actually, she gave me loads of faith though in the younger generation, because she was talking about how one of her friends has been training like an algorithm to detect if people have bad mental health, and like just paying all those things. And anyway, she gave me a faith in the younger generation that they're actually like trying to work towards better mental health and not feeding into fake news, and just saying communities at her school are working on that. And that was exciting to hear that from kind of the younger generation happening, because I feel like sometimes actually it's people who are older who don't always, I don't want to say older but I don't want to put everyone in the same age bracket, but I feel like sometimes people maybe who haven't grown up on
Mariana's having a go.
I feel like sometimes though, I feel like it's, if you didn't grow up necessarily with social media, sometimes it's easier to get lost in that hole. Maybe the younger generation have grown up with it, know how to navigate it. Like even I think people of my age are getting lost in that social media hole sometimes, not knowing how to navigate it properly. But yeah, that was
So there have been studies on this, that the most likely age group that are to fall for fake news and to spread it are boomers. So like, we can blame the boomers in general. Exactly. But there's also a lot of I have a lot of faith in the upcoming generation. Like, they've also been impacted a lot by really bad algorithmic decisions, like with the GCS or the protests last summer, where they had the wonderful slogan, "Fuck the algorithm."
I love that.
Me too. I was like, I have faith in these people. Like, so I think that the fact that they're going to be negatively affected by these systems is going to force them to, or like kind of force them to accept that technical systems aren't perfect, and they kind of exist within a frame of understanding how the system should be. Another thing that I find quite interesting, or like that I note about myself every now and again, is that I remember when I was younger, when I was a teen, I was told that just you wait until you're older and you will become more conservative. And I was like, that's just not been true.
Same. I was going to say that's what.
Oh, I mean, I had a history teacher in high school who was like, by the time you're third, you're probably gonna vote for for a center-leaning party that's economically, and that focuses on being economically conservative. And I don't know. I'm 32 now, and like I've just gone further left. Like it's just, this is things are fundamentally wrong, and the the fundamental issue is that we're applying these systems to force people into labor to live.
Yeah. I think that's honestly, I think that's just hit me a lot about just like how people boomers maybe. But yeah, they say when you grow up you're going to become more conservative. That's like a common thread. Like a lot of people be like, when you're my age you'll vote conservative because you'll realize that the issues align with your values more. And I'm like, no, not necessarily. That's not the case at all.
Maybe once we're not on PhD student salaries, we'll be like, yeah, lower the taxes.
When you're earning your millions.
I don't know, like it's so I've done like so I'm also working at the Digital Democracy Institute right now, and like getting a full-time salary from them.
He's already
Exactly. And I'm still like, how do I pay? Like, I don't want to pay taxes for things that I shouldn't pay taxes for, but also, like, my base tax rate should be reasonable. And by reasonable, I mean higher than it is right now, because clearly there's a deficiency in the amount of taxes that are coming to allow us to actually have a fully to allow us to fund the social systems that we need to be funded.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine that maybe coming from Denmark to the UK, it might be even more of a shock. But I think Denmark is quite famous for having extremely high taxes, but actually a really great standard of living and really good equality.
I mean, one of the things so there are a lot of issues with Denmark, but one of the really good things is that tertiary education is fully funded. So it's all free, and you also get a monthly bursary for doing it. That monthly bursary is probably just going to cover your rent and not much more. But it's still enough that you can have like a 15-hour job a week, a 15-hour week job, to earn money to go out and have dinner and to buy groceries and stuff. But the positive of it, or what's really positive, is that it allows for a lot of social movement. So a lot of people who wouldn't otherwise be able to go to university can, because they can actually it's not a financial burden to them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean that's something that is true in Scotland as well. I know not in England, but in Scotland, your undergraduate is also fully funded by the government, and I think Scottish students also get a bursary, and I think that's something that's really great. I mean, compared to, I guess, England, where tuition fees are
they're 9,000 a year now. I got lucky. I was like just on the cusp. I was like the last year to do my undergraduate where we only had to pay 3,000. But then I think Amanda and I have spoken this before though, that like England especially is very classist, isn't it? So it doesn't really suit the narrative to have to allow like people who maybe traditionally wouldn't have gone to university to have that chance, and now it's just been made harder. So I don't know, it's such a shame though. It's just kind of gatekeeping institutions is not the way forward at all.
Anyway, I'm realizing we've kind of gone off the rails. Maybe we should try to move back.
Getting political.
Hate speech online. It can be political hate speech, but
it can.
And we're actually going to end part 1 here. If you want to listen to the rest of our conversation with Z, you can tune in next week, again on Thursday.
And of course, if you want to reach out to us on social media, we're at Let's Chat Ethics on Twitter. And if you want to email us, we're at letschatethics@gmail.com.
And see you next week. Bye.
Bye.